What a great calling for the church. God has set us apart, but also God has, first of all, set apart the family. Last few weeks we've been walking through the book of Colossians and see where the family is important. Important for us to recognize our roles in the family. This movie came out in 2003. I have not seen this movie, but the name was Freaky Friday. It had who was the star? Jamie Lee Curtis and who's the other girl? Somebody help me. Lindsay Lohan. That was actually the third time it's been made into a movie. It was a 1972 novel, and it was made. The first time it was made, it had Jodie Foster in it. The second time it was made for television. But in this movie, all three times, it was that a mother and a daughter of a teenage daughter and her mother that just could not get along, that did not understand each other, argued all the time, and then through the supposedly miraculous fortune cookie that they swapped bodies. And the daughter became the mama and the mama became the daughter physically. And through that, you can just imagine the setup for comedy that takes place. But through that day, they came to recognize and understand each other a little bit better. That's kind of what I hope happens as not that we have a Freaky Friday or a Freaky Sunday either, but that you come to recognize as parents and children a better understanding. My goal, first of all, is for Christians to come to understand God's Word better. That's why we're here, to worship Him and praise Him and let His Word penetrate our heart. But in that, I hope also for us to come to a better understanding within the relationships that God gives us. And when you look at parents, look at children, and children look at parents, you can pick your friends, but you don't pick your family. And sometimes you feel like you're stuck with your family, but I hope that you feel instead that you're blessed with your family. So if you will, this morning, we're going to look at that relationship between parents and children again. Kind of last week we looked and we asked the question or made the statement, what every parent wishes their child knew about them, and we looked at that last week. This week we're going to look at what every child wishes their parents knew about them. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 20, he says, "Children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, so that they will not lose heart." The companion verse for this is Colossians chapter 3 and Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first command with a promise, so that it will be well with you and that you may live a long life on this earth." Now, God is telling children to obey their parents, but He doesn't say that it's going to be easy. And last week we kind of looked at that. Sometimes it is very easy, and if we just try to understand each other, it can certainly improve that relationship. Well, the same is true for parents too. And except for the fact that every parent, your children don't know what it's like to be in your shoes. We asked them last week to think about if you could only know what the parent really feels, that we're not out to get you and we're not out to hold you back. We're out to launch you out. We want you to go in the right direction like arrows in the hands of a mighty man. Your children have never experienced what it means to be a parent, but every parent, every adult, you have experienced what it means to be a child. You have experienced what it means to be a teenager. But I think that sometimes that most of us have forgotten what it was like. We romanticize that time in our life when experience was the greatest teacher, and that's what we think of all the good times. But you have had that. Maybe sometimes we want to forget that because of the horrible experience you might have suffered in your childhood or in your teen years, and I understand that as well. But sometimes I think it's just that we get in a rut. We just get in the habit of doing things the way that we do it, and we don't even recognize that we're stuck in a rut, and everybody is hurt by that. It's just a cycle that we kind of go through. And what I hope today that we can do is for us to come to the point to recognize that we don't need to just have a default answer. We need to look at our child just like not as just a part, but for who they are. Not just a part of the family, but every child is different. I have 3. Before I had children, I had 3 ideas about how to raise children. Now I've had 3 children. I don't have any idea how to raise children, but every child is different. If you had 100 children, they would all be different. And so you cannot just have that pat answer. I found a little funny thing. David Letterman used to do the top 10. These are the top 10 things that you will never hear your dad say. Top 10 things you'll never hear your dad say. 10, you'll never hear your dad say, well, how about that? I'm lost. I'm going to have to stop and ask for directions. You'll never hear your dad say that. Number 9, you know, Princess, now that you're 13 years old, I think you're really going to be looking forward to all those dates that I'm going to let you go on now, aren't you, at 13? You'll never hear Dad say that. Number 8, I noticed all your friends seem to have this hostile attitude. Man, I really like that. Never hear that. Number 7, you will never hear a dad or a husband say this. Oh, here's my credit card and my car keys. Go crazy. Never hear that. Number 6, what do you mean you want to play football? Is ice hockey and being a ballerina not good enough for you, son? You'll never hear Dad say that. Number 5, when you ask what do you want for Father's Day, you'll never hear Dad say, oh, just flowers will be fine. You'll never hear that. Now, if you say something about chocolate, you got to see him, not flowers. Number 4, your mom and I are going away for the weekend. Maybe you ought to think about having a party while we're gone. You'll never hear Dad say that. Number 3, well, I don't know what's wrong with your car. Maybe it's that thingamadiggy-Jew thing that makes it run or something. I don't know. You have it towed to the mechanic and tell him we'll pay whatever price he wants to pay. You'll never hear Dad say that. Number 2, no son of mine's going to live under this house without a body piercing. Now quit your belly aching, let's get down to the mall. And number 1, what you want to do that for? Go and get a job. I make plenty of money for you to spend. Here's $100. You'll never hear a dad say those things. There's a lot of things that are less humorous that we get in the habit, and I will know in my family, as I was growing up, and I've been guilty of it myself, and I've talked to many, many people that we kind of get in a default mode of saying no to everything. No, 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 no. And they can be asking, can I become the next Mother Teresa? And you'll say no to good deeds. No. That's our immediate knee-jerk response. And so I want us to kind of get past that. There's some things as a parent that you should never do. You should always honor your father and your mother. And your children are going to learn what that looks like, how you flesh out that commandment, because they're watching you honor your father and mother. And if you do not honor your father and mother, then don't expect your children to honor you when you get to that point in life. So those are some important lessons that everybody has to learn in time. Also, you come to that point where you wonder why family relationships grow so bitter, and it really boils down to how the children watch the parents treat even our family. As a philosopher, John Locke, said, parents sometimes wonder why the streams are bitter when they themselves have poisoned the fountain. So this morning we're going to look at what every child wishes that their parents knew. The first thing that I want to pull out, that if parents, if you will listen, every child would say this. Every child would say this. That sometimes I need you to just listen to me rather than judge me or to try to fix me. I tell you, I'm guilty of that. That's not just a man thing, that's a Dale thing. I'm very guilty of that. If they come and they just want to talk, they just need to talk. They just need to have communication. And I want to help them put the pieces back together. And sometimes it's too soon to put pieces back together. Sometimes they have to recognize God's grace in the moment, in the midst of all the pain. So I have been very guilty of that. And I think that's the number one problem between parents and teenagers. I think it's the number one problem between men and women, husbands and wives, is the failure of communication. Some of y'all remember the old movie Coohan Luke, and this is the warden standing out saying that what we have here is a failure to communicate. Well, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And I think for most children, they get more frustrated because their parents aren't listening. you hear them and you respond to maybe a suggestion that you'll give, but you don't really hear them. You don't listen to them. So Proverbs chapter 12, verse 5 says, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man is he who listens to counsel. That's true in all things, including this relationship between family. The second most common communication blunder is exaggeration. Whenever you come to the place where you in your frustration say to your child, I've told you 1,000,000 times to clean your room. Really? Have you really told them 1,000,000 times? Because just a little bit of math and you'll figure out that if you stood there and said, clean your room, clean your room, clean your room, clean your room, clean your, it would take you 2 years to say that 1,000,000 times. And that may seem like a kind of light example of that, but you think about that your children recognize that is most important to you. It's not that they can talk to you. It's not that they can discuss with you. It's not even that you're willing to help them or teach them or show them. Sometimes it is just task-oriented, and that is so frustrating. I know last year we taught some classes with Dr. Jerry Chapman, 5 love languages. That was a great study. At first, I had to look through that book because I didn't see our family's mode of communication and love language in there. Bitterness and sarcasm. That just wasn't a love language in there. And sometimes that is how families communicate. And sarcasm and bitterness, that's how we react to one another. And that doesn't help a thing. That does not move the conversation towards something positive. So the child wants the parent to stop exaggerating. The parent wants the child to respond. And if you come to that point that you recognize that we're just not communicating, maybe you need to communicate why this is so important to you as a parent. Maybe you need to even say, even if it is an act of discipline, something that you need to do. You need to make your bed every morning. You need to clean your room every day. I'm trying to help you to learn some responsibilities so that later on in life you can take on bigger things. This would be a great encouragement to me if you would do that. If you just explain to them what your motive is, why is it important to them? And so exaggeration is something that is not helpful. The next communication breakdown I thought of is the martyr complex. And every parent runs to this at some point or another. I said I never would, but I've said it before. Everything I said to myself when my daddy or my mama said it to me that I said, I will never say that to my child, then I have exponentially. It's getting worse with every child. That's why the Lord only gave us 3. But you say things like, and it'll kind of involve the emotion. After all that I've done for you, and this is the thanks that I get. I mean, boy, it's just right there, isn't it? But it doesn't really help anything, does it? Whenever you come to that point where you are using the martyr complex, it will move you down one more step to compare. Now, I did not personally have a problem with this. This was not, I had all kind of hang-ups when I was little, but this wasn't one of them. But it could have been. My older sister, just older than me, Donna, was a super bright student. She and Karen Tiffin in our church were the top of their class. Donna was a Golden Panther. Donna I don't think she ever made a B. She made straight A's. My sister Donna had perfect attendance. She never missed a day of school. She had perfect attendance through all 12 years of school. I mean, that tells you what kind of sister I had. She loved school. At night, whenever she would come in, then she would start studying. And she would study pretty much until bedtime. And that's the kind of student she was. That didn't rub off on me. I did not make straight A's. And there was always something written in the comment part of my report card. I wasn't a bad kid in that sense, but I just was not driven. But I cannot tell you. I'll give you one example. I went into 9th grade, went into algebra class, and as the teacher was calling the rolls, she said, Dale Funderburg, you're Donna's brother, aren't you? And I said, yes, ma'am, I am. She said, Donna's one of my favorite students. She is so bright. I look forward to teaching you, Dale. At the end of the first 6 weeks is when we got report cards. She asked me to go out in the hall when they were handing out report cards. And I thought, well, this is not my first trip, but I'm not real sure why I'm going out this time. And we got out in the hall, and she handed me my report card, and she said, Dale, what's the problem? And I looked down, and I had a B. And I said, woohoo! Because I didn't study. I didn't learn how to study till I was in college. I was satisfied. My daddy said I couldn't play ball if I didn't at least make a B. So as long as I made a B, that's about as much as I applied myself. Well, now God's convicted me about that since then, and I will walk through a flame to do what I'm supposed to do. I'll walk through a lot of things to do what I'm supposed to do. But that, for a lot of kids, that is crushing. When people say, why can't you be like your sister? Or I'll wait to see for you to catch up with your sister. I don't know if anybody says that about a brother. But what it says, it doesn't help. It just says that I value this person more than you. That's what some kids hear. Another communication blunder is that comparison. And I might think this is the worst as far as lasting damage, comparing your child to somebody else. To be able to say, I love them more than I love you. You don't say those words, but that's what the child hears. And then the fourth one is prophecy. This may be the most dangerous, where you predict where they're headed. If you don't change your course, if you don't get in those books, if you don't study, then you're going to wind up just like somebody in your family, you fill in the blank. Or when you come in and you say, you lazy bum, get up off that couch. You're just like, fill in the blank. What does that say to a child? Richard Morris, as a child psychologist, said the greatest gift we can give one another is the purity of our attention. We need to stop, even if it's a kind of a hard situation, we need to stop and make sure that our child hears not that we're comparing them to anybody else or that we want them to measure up to anybody else, that we're interested in them. So an example of little Sally says, just out of the blue, Mommy, do you love me? How does Mommy respond? Kind of depends on what Daddy's done that day, how Mommy responds. Mommy might be frustrated, and Mommy could respond, what kind of question is that? You know that I love you. Now get in there and clean your room. Or little Sally could say, Mommy, do you love me? And Mommy could stop for just a second what she's doing and get down on the child's level and say, baby, I love you with all of my heart. What would make you unsure that I don't love you? I do love you. Give her a hug, and you have bolstered that child for the rest of the day. That child will bend over backwards. My daddy was a hard disciplinarian. And so I would do what my daddy asked me to do it because I knew I had to. And I grew and matured, and it was the point where I saw right from wrong. But my mama could have asked me to eat lead paint. I would have done it. Because my mother was the one who always knelt down and said, son, I believe in you. Son, I love you. Son, what do you need? That was my mama. I think for every one of us that we need to see, sometimes our children just need us to listen to them. They don't need us to fix them. They just need us to listen. The second truth I gain in this active listening is that what your child wants you to know is, Mom and Daddy, I respond better to praise than I do to criticism. Sometimes we try to fix them. Sometimes we try to shame them, and we criticize them. Criticism will eventually just wear you down. Nehemiah, they were called back to build the wall around, and they were so discouraged, and there were those who came against them. In Nehemiah chapter 6 and verse 9, it says, for all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking, this is what they were thinking, they will become discouraged with the work, and it will not be done. But now, oh God, strengthen my hand. This is what scientists have, in studies have discovered, it takes 8 compliments to overcome 1 criticism. 8 to 1. So if you're critical with somebody about something, it takes 1 encouragement to overcome 8 criticisms. I think we're guilty sometimes, and we just retreat from that. But I believe that God means for us to build up one another, to bring out the best in one another, to encourage one another, to forgive one another, to love one another. And you can't do that being critical, not just for criticisms. I receive corrective criticism. This is a way I think we could do this better. We all want to know those. But just to say you're lazy like somebody else, or you remind me of somebody else, stop and listen to what you're saying, because they're hearing you. The third thing that a child wishes the parents would know is that when you criticize my friends, I hear you criticizing me. Now, normally there's a progression that happens with all children. Excuse me just a second. For children, birth to about age 9, you are their heroes. Mamas and daddies, parents, you're their heroes. They'll argue with people about their parents. They'll take up for their parents. One little boy stood out on the playground and said, "My daddy can whip your daddy." And other kids said, "So what? So can my mama." And he was proud of his mama, wasn't he? But until they get somewhere around 9, 10 years old, you are it. You're the one they come to, you're the one they talk to, and then hormones happen. And they'll bounce around, and then you have the only thing you wonder then is concerning demon possession or something. You wonder, how can that happen? And for some kids, it happens fast. It doesn't happen all that long. But some kids, it lasts from the time they're 11 till they're about 17, 18 years old. You are not the most important person in their life during that stage. Their friends are. They will run to their friends with everything. And sometimes you need to be careful. When you're criticizing their friends, they take it as you're criticizing me because you think I can't pick the right kind of friends, or you just don't like them because you don't like me. And there's all sorts of things that are not true, but that's what's being communicated into their mind. And so we have to understand that, and it's okay whenever their friend messes up to use that as a teachable moment and say, now, this is a situation, you know what's happened, and this is why it happened. We don't want to see you go down that path. Or to be able to see their friends and to question kind of where they're going with this relationship and to talk about those things. But if you can do that without demeaning the other person, then maybe you'll get by without them understanding that you're demeaning them. That's what every child wants a parent to do. And sometimes their motive's higher than you think it is. I'm going to give our students credit. They are concerned for the gospel. They're concerned about sharing with other people. When I was in the 7th grade, my family went to Sunday school, went to church, but there was a boy that I kind of befriended in the 5th grade. 5th grade, Amory, that's when desegregation took place, and we had to go to a different place, and it was kind of mixed up. Well, this young man, we kind of got thrown together because we were in 5th grade together. And as time grew, then I invited him to church and invited him over to my house, and we were good friends. He got killed here a couple of years ago, died a couple of years ago, still in Amory. And his mom and daddy didn't go to church. He kind of had a hard life. And he rode the bus to church, but he wouldn't ride the bus if I wasn't on the bus. So they'd come by with a bus and pick me up. About the same time my mom and daddy were leaving for church because, they were scared somebody's going to get their seat in Sunday school. So I get on the bus and ride all over town, and when I get to Jerry's house, I go out and knock on the door. And there was a time or two whenever I knocked on the door and his mom came to the door and said, "He's not coming today." But that wasn't Jerry's fault. Most days when I knocked on the door, Jerry would come. We'd go get on the bus, we'd go sit on the back seat, we'd laugh, we'd talk, and go to Sunday school. Then it became, I'd knock on the door, and Jerry came and his little sister came. And then after a while, Jerry came and all the children in the family came. And I can remember, we were actually in the 8th grade. I can remember where I was sitting with Jerry. Whenever he had been in Sunday school and he was having questions, and I remember sitting at the picnic table outside middle school and sharing with Jerry how I got saved. I didn't have all the theological message, But I can share with you that day that Jerry prayed, believing that Jesus would save him and forgive him, and Jerry was saved. When I got home that very afternoon, my daddy said, "You know, I heard Jerry had gotten in some trouble last weekend. I don't think you need to be hanging out with Jerry." And I said, "But Daddy, let me tell you what happened today." He said, "Son, I don't want to talk about it." We parents are like that, not just my dad. I was like that too. Sometimes we think we're watching out for our kids, but we forget our kids are Christians too. They're trying to reach their world too, and we need to support them in that. And then the last one that I want us to think about is when I'm acting like I hate you. Anybody with kids that sometimes you wonder, do they hate me? Sometimes we don't even have to wonder. They'll just go ahead and tell you, "I hate you." When I act like I'm hating you, maybe it's because the real reason is I don't like myself. Parent, hear that. At the lowest point of their self-esteem, when we would think would be the most vibrant, most beautiful time of life, when you're living it, it's the point of lowest self-esteem. And some of that hostility toward parents is because of poor self-image. If parents reacted to the attitude and only to the words, then we would never move past that. But that conversation has come to the place, even about the strange consequences of their actions or whatever it may be, to let them know that we love them. My children, when they were younger, then I would use a spanking spoon. That's what we called it. It didn't have to be a spoon. It could be a switch or belt or whatever, you know. I never hurt my children because I always whipped my leg first. I always knew exactly what I was doing. I told them ahead of time. And you may completely disagree with corporal punishment as a disciplinary means for your children. And if you are, stay after and I'll cut a switch. I had one lady in Walmart come up and I got on to Joshua and she said, "You're being awful harsh." And I said, "Your mouth's moving. You need to shut it." But your children, sometimes that's the only time that they know that you love them. I know that sounds odd. But when they see that this hurts you so much that you have to correct them, and that is part of the plan for us all to walk together, that we're going to surrender to God's place, order for us in the family. I am the parent, you are the child, and it is my responsibility. And there are consequences. If they don't learn that when they're little, then think of what they'll be into when they get older. Because when they get in college, it won't be taking your cell phone away. It'll be flunking out. When it gets into a job, it won't be a spanking. It'll be you'll lose your livelihood. If it's in the law, it means you'll be going to jail. Teach them early. I want to end this morning with a reminder to myself. It's not just when I stand in the pulpit, certainly. Not just when you're in the role as teacher, but when you're in the role as a parent or grandparent. When you think it least likely they're watching. I wrote down some things about my grandpa. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you get your hand torn up in the barbed wire because that stray dog had his leg wrapped in the barbed wire. And I saw you go out and untangle that stray dog and let it go. And that taught me something as a little boy. It taught me to be kind to God's creatures, all animals, except for buzzards. I'm sorry. When you thought I wasn't looking, long before the sun came up, I saw you sitting at the kitchen table reading your Bible. And that made me know that it was alive to you. It wasn't just a book. It was God's word to you. And from an early age, it helped me to see it differently whenever I looked into the Bible. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you cutting firewood for a sick neighbor and carry it to their house, even though I know that you had a hurt shoulder. but I was watching. Now then, it's helped me understand to put my physical limitations on the back seat to what God's purpose is. That's why I'm here today, because my grandpa taught me that. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you give Grandma the bigger piece of cake, even though we both knew she wasn't going to eat half of it. And it taught me that others come before me and how to love somebody more than I love myself. When you thought I wasn't looking, you stopped a man at Moon's grocery store from speaking evil about the man that everybody knew had cheated you or tried to cheat you, and he tried to cheat half the community. But you stopped him and said, I won't say anything evil about him. As a little boy, that taught me that character is not always easy, but it's always right. Parents, there's a lot of things that your children wish that you knew about them, and they're watching. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for your grace.